My name's Andrew Connell. I'm a SharePoint MVP and have a company called Critical Path Training where we do SharePoint education.
What's awesome about SharePoint 2010?
So what's so cool about SharePoint 2010 is that Microsoft has done a big focus on really developer access, or data access, excuse me. A lot of different ways to get data out of SharePoint, but one of the cool things is that a lot of people that before in 2007, when they were doing things like trying to do Silverlight development, they'd have to go write all the plumbing to get the data out of SharePoint so that Silverlight could consume that data in, like, say, a WCF service or something like that.
Right.
Now what's cool is that in SharePoint 2010 is that we have this thing called the client object model that exposes all that data from SharePoint and handles all of the communication back and forth to SharePoint so that we as developers don't have to worry about the plumbing layer. We just have to worry about the UI side and the business piece inside of a Silverlight app, among a lot of other ways to go through and pull data back out of SharePoint from JavaScript or whatever. But probably the coolest one, or the one that's got the biggest buzz, is the fact that Silverlight is just so much more friendly and easy to develop and launch in SharePoint than it was in the past.
What kind of Silverlight tools, or, I've known SharePoint for web parts, right? So how does Silverlight fit in? Is it also a web part?
So what you can do is Silverlight's just going to be used to, you can use a web part to develop it. You got to have a way to basically get Silverlight running up on the user's machine, right? So we can do that through just a standard page. We can do it through a web part. What's neat about it, though, is that in SharePoint 2010 we have this thing called the sandbox, and it's a way for us to build custom code and deploy it to a server without ever getting an IT pro involved. And there's a bunch of resource monitoring and stuff, so it's not really like a backdoor to get code on the server. But the trick is that when you do that, all of your stuff is going to be, you're going to do a subset of certain things, and you accumulate points based on what you're doing. So it's almost like a quota-based system, and you're only allowed to do so much in a day. What's cool about using Silverlight inside of SharePoint for something like this is that you take all of the work that's being done by your component and you push it off to the client machine, so you're not subject to all the stuff that the sandbox is going to limit you to, and all of the monitoring and resource counters and stuff. It's also going to give people just a much richer experience of being able to go through and to get content out, interactive content inside of SharePoint, than using a browser-based interface. So it's just kind of keeping things a lot more fresh and then giving us a lot more functionality.
Now, what's the development experience like now with SharePoint 2010?
It's a lot better than it was before. SharePoint 2007, for the most part, we didn't have any dev tools. There was a little add-on that Microsoft had for Visual Studio that a lot of people used, but it left a lot to be desired. The community built a lot of stuff. In Visual Studio 2010, what Microsoft did is they have dedicated development tools developed by the Visual Studio dev team. And the coolest part about it is they talked to the product team of how things should be done, but probably the most appealing part was that they also went to the community and said, while they say that's how you should do it, how is the community doing it? So that let's make sure that what we give the community, it's not something so radically different from what they've been doing already. So we have a lot of first-class development tools inside of Visual Studio. It's same levels when you pick, if you do a custom install, you want C#, VB, C++, and the last one is SharePoint DevTools, and they're just baked right in.
Oh, nice.
So and plus we can install SharePoint on Vista Service Pack 2 or higher, or Windows 7 and higher, and do development right on a client OS, where we couldn't do that before. So that's all really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, you also have a fantastic blog, and on it you've talked about Code Rush and how you've used it for SharePoint. Can you maybe mention a couple of those plugins? Yeah,
so what I did for SharePoint 2007 was I was one of the ones that was also frustrated with the developer experience, or lack thereof, in SharePoint 2007. And so what I did is I used Code Rush. SharePoint is very declarative, a lot of XML. And a lot of that XML, you could just templatize it and just kind of fill in the blanks. So I used Code Rush, built a bunch of templates where I could just type in a couple templates, a quick little thing. Like if you want to create a content type, I had a template for ECT, and it would do inside of an element manifest file, would stub out the XML for a content type, and then I believe they're called fields, but just have those hot swappable areas for the name, the ID, and stuff like that. It's because I did it because of the same reason you guys have the templates. It's stuff that is, there's no real thinking you have to do to put into this. It's just a kind of a cookie cutter approach that you have to put stuff in. You have to then fill in the blanks. And what's neat about it is that I'm taking the cookie cutter approach of just putting more and more XML out there. I'm automating that using your tool to go through and do this stuff. And I think most of the stuff that I did was available. That was just the templates piece, and that was available even using Code Rush Express because they were just custom templates. And we also had some custom refactorings that I did for building the definition for a web part, stuff like that. some of the stuff, the dev tools, the new dev tools in Visual Studio do satisfy some of those things, but I'm going through and trying to reevaluating and saying, okay, well, where's the pack that I'm going to have of templates for Visual Studio 2010 for SharePoint that the product team did not fill the gap in. So I'm going through and building some of those, updating some of those templates and put them out there pretty soon as well for Visual Studio 2010.
Now, a lot of people don't know, but you're you're one of the main reasons behind SharePoint.devexpress.com.
Yeah.
You kept pushing us for many months, and you said, you guys got to put something out for SharePoint, right? Now, have you got a chance to try some of that stuff, the grids and stuff?
I have. What I find it's almost amusing, but I shouldn't say it like that because it's a little demeaning of the people who do this stuff. A lot of people look at SharePoint as this totally different animal. And so they look at something like, say, a grid by you guys or other UI controls, and they're like, do you guys support SharePoint? And the question really isn't, do you guys support SharePoint? It's just, okay, what do I do to have to get it into SharePoint? Because you support ASP.NET, so it works just fine out of the box. It's, what do I have to do to get it on the server? And so there's a whole process of packaging everything up, and how do I get it on the server, and then how do I leverage it inside of a web part? I was pushing you guys, I was like, you could see the SharePoint wagon was really picking up, and it's how do I go through and make sure that you guys are capturing this as well, and making sure the community is aware of the fact that that stuff is available to them to use in these in their web parts. Same thing is true like now for Silverlight. People look at doing Silverlight development inside the SharePoint, and they're like, well, do your components support Silverlight? They're Silverlight components. You just put them inside of your Silverlight control you're building. Your Silverlight control isn't a SharePoint control, it just leverages data inside of SharePoint. You could be doing it with OData, you could be doing it with whatever you want, or using something called the client object model. This adding a couple other assemblies in, and poof, you're off to the races.
Awesome. Now, let me ask you one last thing.
Yep.
This company that you mentioned, Critical Path. So what does Critical Path do? I mean, obviously something SharePoint related. Is it on the IT side, on the dev side?
Yeah, so what we do is, I founded the company last year with Ted Pattison, and all we do is SharePoint education. So criticalpathtraining.com, we offer classes for administrators and IT pros, developers, SharePoint designers, end users, site collection administrators, and a bunch of additional classes coming out as well later this year, all around SharePoint 2007, SharePoint 2010. We've got a bunch of stuff for 2007. Some people that know SharePoint know the Ignite program or the Metro program, and we were behind a lot of the developer content for all of those. We've been working with SharePoint 2010 since actually August of 2008. Taught all the TAP customers, taught a lot of Microsoft people, so we got classes all over the place. Open enrollment, you go register, go take the class somewhere, online, all different options, private classes and too. So only SharePoint. All we do is SharePoint education.
And you are like the best SharePoint MVP ever, right?
I'll let somebody else kind of go through and qualify where everybody else is, but it's been fun. It's been a fun ride for the last few years. You could see, I've worked with SharePoint back since 2003, and you could see the wave that 2007 was taking off. And it was a lot of fun to sit there and watch the interest kind of really skyrocket, and then be at a place like TechEd and see all the interest come in as well. It's really cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Andrew.
Sure. Thank you, Rob.